Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our next lessons from TTA members, which is from teacher to tutor. So it will be Holly, John, Natasha and Caroline telling us their story from moving from the classroom and being a teacher into tutoring. I'm going to introduce the panel one by one and then they can give us a quick introduction of themselves. So Holly, good morning. Oh, Holly, you're muted.
Hello, sorry. Do you want me to introduce myself now?
Sorry, yes, please.
Okay. Am I still muted? No.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. So hi, I'm Holly. I'm the safeguarding lead for TTA, and I think I've met quite a few of you before. It's really nice to be here, and I am looking forward to it.
And John Nichols.
Hi everyone, my name's John. I think some of you may have seen me before. I've been president of TTA for a few years. And I used to be a teacher and I'm still a tutor, although very busy doing lots of different things at the same time. Thanks so much.
And Natasha McIntosh Berry.
Hi everyone, you can call me Tash. I have been a teacher for over 10 years in a North London prep school and other countries overseas as well, and now have been tutoring even longer. Looking forward to sharing some ideas.
Thank you, Tash. And Caroline Martin.
Hi, I'm Caroline. I've been teaching for about 15 years. I've moved into tutoring within the last year or so, and I love it, not going to lie.
Perfect, thank you all. So the session format for this morning, I still haven't updated this slide, sorry. So we are going to start by asking the panel 3 set questions. They'll take it in turns to answer the question for the first part of our session, and then afterwards we will take any questions that you've had from their answers, as well as any general Q&A that you may have. So our first question, and we're going to start with Holly first, is what prompted you to leave the classroom and move into tutoring, and how did you take those first steps once you made the decision?
Okay, so when I was a child, I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. It's a funny thing. Sometimes you just know what you want to be. I had a really, really inspirational English teacher, and English was my favourite subject and really the only one I could do anyway. So that was what I decided to do. I thought I'm going to be an English teacher. I started off as an unqualified teacher. I worked at a further education college for a bit, and then I decided to do a PGCE. And halfway through my PGCE, I had a baby, so I had to kind of extend it a bit as well. And then I eventually became an English teacher in a school. Absolutely loved it. But I had 2 quite young children, so I was part-time for a number of years, went full-time eventually. And then I became a head of English. And then I very quickly moved into senior management. Senior management was okay. It was very useful in terms of a safeguarding experience, and it's led me to where I am now, actually. But I really, really missed the teaching. I was given the classes that nobody else wanted because I was deputy head. And so I was given like that year 9 low ability class where, you know, they really don't like English. They don't want to be there. And I missed my GCSE and my A-level teaching. And so I was in senior management until 2022. I was a safeguarding lead, I was a head of boarding, I was a deputy head, and I decided that I was going to leave and become self-employed. And part of that is because I miss teaching, and part of that is because I realised that really the only person I can work for is myself. So I did that, and actually the way I started in tutoring was that a friend sent me a Daily Mail article, and it was about how to make £1 million as a tutor. And I thought, I'm never going to make £1 million because I'm just not like that. I'm not that sort of person. But I am going to contact the agencies in that article and see if they've got any work for me. So that's what I did. And I started off working for 2 or 3 agencies. I then got involved with the National Tutoring Programme. And that's how I kind of got into it. And I ended up going from leaving my senior management position I think I resigned in February 2022. And by August 2022, I had a full list of clients, and I was managing to pay my mortgage, and I was managing to keep going. So I thought this is going to work. And actually, I've been really, really lucky, and it has worked. And obviously, then you'll know that I moved into safeguarding and tutoring. And because of my background, that kind of works quite well as well. So I think some of it has been luck, and some of it has been that I'm the type of person who doesn't really give up and just kind of keeps going. And I really enjoy working for myself. It's working out well for me. The type of person that I am, the freedom that it gives me, the flexibility that it gives me. And also, just to come back to what I started talking about there, my love for my subject. So I love English. I could talk about it for hours, almost more than I could talk about safeguarding, if you can believe that. And so I love teaching A-level again. I love teaching GCSE again. And it's really kind of reignited my love for like Shakespeare, like Dickens, you know, and I wasn't able to teach them for years when I was in senior management because the opportunity just wasn't there. So hopefully that answers the question. More than happy to take questions later on. So if I've said something and you want to know a bit more about it, please do make a note of it and ask later on. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Holly. And John, you are next. What prompted you to leave the classroom and move into tutoring, and how did you take those first steps once you made the decision?
So I didn't move straight from the classroom into tuition. In fact, I never had a story where I always wanted to be a teacher. I always wanted to be a naval officer for most of my life, and then some bureaucratic. They managed to scupper that plan on 2 occasions with bureaucratic inefficiency. They lost all my paperwork twice. Anyway, I ended up becoming a teacher almost by accident as a result of that. And I was on the Teach First program. And for anyone that doesn't know, the Teach First program is like a 2-year try teaching. And if you like it, stay. And if you don't like it, you don't have to stay. So I was like, well, okay, that makes sense. Because if I do something else, then I've got 2 years to decide what else I want to do. So I thought I'd do that. So I came into teaching. I went and taught at a secondary school, a high school in Kent, a challenging school in Kent, near Maidstone. And I was the only person, I think, at the school, or one of the very few people at the school who had been to any university other than the University of Kent. Nothing wrong with the University of Kent, but it was almost that there was no diversity amongst the staff body. Everyone saw me as an outsider. All the students saw me as an outsider, right? They were like, "You've been to Durham. Where the hell is that?" They had no idea where that is. They didn't really care, actually, to be honest, where it was. They weren't very much interested. Now, I left the classroom because I was a terrible teacher. Well, at least the school thought I was a terrible teacher. And to be fair, all of the classes went badly wrong. They told me that I shouldn't do what I'd been trained to do in the first couple of weeks. I was like, all right, what should I do instead? I did what they said to do instead. It didn't work. Then they eventually showed me the person who was the best person in the school for managing behavior, because I had a class rebellion. Someone threatened to stab someone. Someone threatened to come and kill me because their uncle's going to come and kill me because I confiscated their phone. All these very lovely things. So then someone eventually said to me, well, you've given this young lady too many detentions in this class. I said, well, that's the behavior policy. If she jumps up and down and shouts about her friends while I'm trying to talk to the class, I've got to give her a detention. So he said, okay, well, her parents are going to come in. I said, that's great. I'll explain to her parents. He said, no. You can't talk to the parents. We have to talk to them. I was like, well, why don't I talk to them? Because she's complaining about me giving detentions. I don't understand why you're going to give it to somebody else. Anyway, to cut a long story short, they felt like they were shielding me from this lady. And the head teacher then said, well, we're going to put you on performance management. I said, there's no point in putting me on performance management. Either you want me to enforce your behavior policy or you don't. And if you want to put me on performance management, which is just your code of saying you want me to leave the school, I'll just resign and I'll leave. I don't really want to stay anyway, to be honest. So I said this to the head teacher, and he said, okay, well, we'll put you on performance management. He sent me an email to follow up. The very next morning, I handed in my resignation notice, and I said that I think we were a week away from the end of the Easter term. It was about mid-March 2012. And when I resigned the next morning, he genuinely looked surprised. Now, I don't know if this is just because he was incredibly simple or because he just didn't believe that I was going to resign or what. But I've made it perfectly clear. And I think this is one thing that everyone should do in their life. You should be clear about what you're going to do and then actually do it. So I said to him, resigning. And he said, well, don't you have to give a term's notice? I said, but we had an agreement. If you put me on performance management, I'm leaving straight away. So then he went, okay, well, yeah, I think you should leave at the end of, before the Easter holidays, when the Easter holidays start. So so I left, and then I went to work for an educational charity for a while, and then it was only when I was working for an educational charity and that contract was going to be expiring that somebody said to me, "Oh, you could be a tutor." And I signed up to some agencies because, like, well, I'm not going to go and spend ages trying to work out where I'm going to get clients. So I just signed up to some agencies, and I absolutely loved tutoring because I just got to teach, and I actually found that I really like teaching, and I really don't like social work, and actually. The job I've been given as a teacher was 90% social work and 10% teaching. And I was like, well, actually, I really don't like that. That doesn't suit my skill set at all. I'm very happy to explain to someone off the top of my head what the causes of the First World War are, or what the light-dependent reaction is in photosynthesis, or how to calculate the charges of different ions in chemistry. I'm very happy to do any of that, but I'm absolutely no interest really in dealing with your scuffle between you and your mate who's no longer your mate because they stole your pen. I don't frankly care. Go and get a new pen. And actually, tuition taught me how to teach. Now, I feel like that's the end of the question, really. I've already told you now I've got into tuition and I loved it. And yeah, I had a bit of a gap in the middle where I worked for an educational charity as well. So it wasn't a straightforward jump. But if I had my time again, I'd have just gone straight into tuition probably. It worked well for me.
Thank you, John. Tash.
Hi. So similar to Holly, I, from a very young age, also knew that I was going to be a teacher. And in Australia, where I grew up and did my BEd, we have work experience for 16-year-olds, and my work experience was in a school. So it's kind of been around for a very long time. I was, as I previously mentioned, in a prep school in North London, and I just felt overworked. I don't know if anybody knows this feeling, but I just felt, I was somewhat successful in my job. And so I would get more students and more subjects and more classes added to my timetable. And so one summer I raised it with my head and I just said, look, I'm feeling overworked. That was kind of my words. They called me in the middle of the summer holidays and said, we've got you, we've heard you, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, cool. Look forward for a bit of a change. Did another whole year, and then next summer holidays we get our timetable for the upcoming year, and at the staff meeting, and they didn't even come up to say hello to me. They just said, Tash, I'm really sorry, but your first break on Monday is not going to be until 2 p.m, which is literally the first time I would have been able to go to the toilet. And I just said, that's not really addressing me feeling overworked, and you haven't even said hello to me. So I gave my notice the next day. I thought, I've asked for help and nothing's going to change. I did enjoy it. And I think, I'm not going to put everything on them. I did really enjoy being in a school. And as part of my own growth and development, I really, really enjoyed like the interventions that I was doing with students on a one-to-one basis. So I probably did take on things that were given to me a little too willingly without saying, okay, if I take this on, what am I going to drop? That part conversation didn't happen. But I think that's when I started to realize, the one-to-one is really a bit more vibey for me. And that's where I was getting my my good times from, I suppose, at school. But when I resigned, it was actually the September of 2020. And I don't know if anybody remembers, December 2020 was when I finished. And then COVID happened in February, March of 2021. So the timing also is part of my story, because I'd already had a parent approach me when I was at school, and it was one of the one-to-ones, and they said, look, Tash, can you work with him outside of school? So I'd sort of broached the waters, I suppose, to a certain extent. And then I found that when I was doing it outside of school, obviously without those constraints of curriculum and just meeting a student where they need it, their timings, their pace, and more importantly, their strategies, that's where I was like, this really works for me. So this is really good. So I made that shift. I thought, okay, fine. When COVID hit, I was like, we'll just do the tutoring, and that's what I enjoy anyway, and we'll make it work. And the thing that worked really well in my favor was everybody moved online. And so while schools moved online, tutoring also moved online. So I've recently just stopped traveling and being a digital nomad for the last 5 years since then, because all my work has been online and I could do it from anywhere in the world. So it was great to have that opportunity through tutoring as well. I still really enjoy the one-to-one aspect. I don't do group tutoring, I do one-to-one, and I still really, really enjoy the that feedback you get from that intimate relationship. And so I think the prompt, because Sam's asking in this question, like, what was the prompt to leave the classroom? I think it was more for me like a perfect storm of not being happy at school, recognizing the part I did love. I still did love teaching, and I did love it on a one-to-one basis. And I also loved the creativity of being outside a classroom setting where you could be more innovative with how you teach and what you teach. So yeah, making the first steps wasn't as hard for me, maybe because I had already put my foot in the water and had that one student that said, you know, can we work outside of school lessons? So that wasn't so hard. But when I did finish at school, and obviously in January 2021, we didn't necessarily know that everything was going to shut down. So I did similarly to John. I also joined an agency just to make sure that I was keeping things afloat and covering all the bills. So yeah, I'm happy to expand more in questions if anybody helps, but that was basically my first move away from school.
Thank you, Tash. And Caroline, what prompted you to leave the classroom and move into tutoring, and how did you take those first steps once you made the decision?
So my path was straightforward in terms of teaching. So I was teacher for 5 years, became Senko, loved Senko, but I think similar to safeguarding, it's an absolutely thankless task and you cannot please everyone, etc. Eventually I sort of came full circle and came back into the classroom. But as you might have noticed that I've got a sling on, I've got some quite significant medical needs. And it got to a point kind of last year where I realised I couldn't cope full time in the classroom. So I'm actually kind of halfway through transition, I suppose, because I work 0.4 in a further education college. And then the rest of my time is built up with tutoring, kind of with the assumption that I'm not going to last a whole lot longer in the classroom, and that I will come full circle then into tutoring. So yeah, mine's more kind of circumstance and medical needs. But the same as everybody else, I love being with students and I love the teaching aspect. So yeah, that's how I ended up where I have.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, everybody. Okay, the next question, I'm going to start with Tash, please. So what surprised you most when you started tutoring compared to classroom teaching? So whether or not this is because of a difference in students or your workload or the business side of things.
So I always think of a surprise as something that wasn't planned or wasn't expected. And I'm very much a planner and like to know where everything's going to be. So what surprised me are probably the things that I hadn't considered, possibly a bit of haste. But as I said, I got my timetable and then the next day I resigned so I could get my change notice in. So in my haste, the things that I probably didn't fully appreciate was through schools, you have a lot of IP, a lot of intellectual property available. You have access to resources, you have access to past paper exams. When you become an independent tutor, that supply chain is cut and it was much more difficult to find that way forward there. And it's not just past papers, it's also the nuances of, you know, head teachers speak to head teachers and they let you know this is sort of the movement, this is the feeling on the ground. You kind of lose that knowledge that's more sort of day-to-day staff room conversation knowledge. So the loss of resources and the loss of information, I definitely underestimated. The other thing that I underestimated that I found surprising was just how much time admin takes me, and that's on me. I'm working on my processes this year so that I can streamline my admin, but because it's not just teaching admin now, obviously teaching admin is teaching admin, and I'll get to that in one of the other questions, but it's the business admin that is still a big deal for me and my goal this year.
Thank you, Tash. And Caroline, can I ask you next, please? So what surprised you most when you started tutoring compared to when you were classroom teaching?
I think for me, it's I live in, you can probably tell, I live in the Black Country and aspirations are extremely low. So the thing that most surprised me about tutoring, not that I didn't expect it, was students who were excited to learn. So rather than sort of being forced to sit through an hour-long tutor session by their parents, actually they're not. They want to be there. They want to learn. They they're engaged. There are so many times I tutor geography, and there are so many times when we don't get through the content necessarily that we wanted to get through because, for example, on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Friday, sometime this week anyway, I've had a 15-minute long conversation with an A-level student about the war in Iran and how that impacts on their specification. And it's not even just there. I had an amazing conversation with a year 8 student the other day who was really excited to learn about volcanoes and earthquakes and has never done it. And it's just that wanton sort of excitement to learn that I think's missing a lot in mainstream school. So yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. Holly, can I ask you next, please?
Yeah, so I really missed my colleagues. I was the one who was like front of stage in the staff panto. I was like go out for drinks every Friday night. I was organise, events at school, and it took me 6 months to get used to not seeing people. And I'm the sort of person who stays in touch with everyone I've ever met and kind of, tries to kind of keep those friendships going. And so that's what I really, really missed. And I think obviously I've found a new life with TTA, and it's really exciting. And I've got all, people now, which is lovely. But for a good 6 months to a year, I really struggled. I really, really did struggle emotionally with it. So that's my big thing. Also, it can be hard work teaching one-to-one. Instead of a class, because sometimes you'll get somebody who just doesn't want to be tutored, and actually, if they're hidden in a class, I'm not saying that any of my students were hidden, but if they're part of 30 children, you don't always notice. And this is why I think tutoring is really good, but also it can be really difficult to get that enthusiasm going. So I would say I've got about 25 students a week now. I would say about 22 of them are really enthusiastic, but I have got those 3 who I'm still struggling to connect with, and that's something that I do. I really pride myself on being able to connect with people. So when it doesn't work and when it's hard, it is really difficult. So that surprised me a little bit as well, that you can't get through to everyone. I know that's possibly a bit ambitious. And also the business side, so invoicing, like not knowing how much I'll earn every month. I'm a single parent, I've got bills, I've got 2 children. There's a bit of a kind of panic reassurance model that goes on in my head. So some of the time I'm thinking this is a nightmare, and some of the time I'm thinking this is fine. And you have to get used to that, I think, and just accept it, that you're not going to have that regular paycheck coming in. It's not going to be the same every month. But I do love it, and I don't regret it at all.
Thank you, Holly. And John, what surprised you most when you started tutoring compared to classroom teaching?
So I think there were 2 main areas, right? So I had a 4 or 5 month gap between leaving the classroom and going into tuition. And I think tuition was a little bit closer to what I'd optimistically hoped that teaching would be, which was more about people wanting to learn and me telling them whatever they wanted to learn about. And I, as I said at the beginning, right, I'm quite quick to admit my career as a teacher in a classroom was a failure. It did not go very well for me or the students or the school, realistically. And we can pick apart why that was. But when I went into being a tutor, I realized a couple of things. Number one, when I was a teacher, for most of my career as a teacher, which was only about 2 years, or just short of 2 years, I had to write up full lesson plans according to a set template in advance of every single lesson and email them to my head of department. So every evening I would stay up until 1 o'clock or something and write up these lesson plans for lessons which I knew would go drastically badly wrong, because year 9 was not going to care about what my literacy action points were for their lesson. But I would dutifully write up all of this documentation, add it all into these templates, send it all off to my head of department, who would acknowledge, oh, I got all of your lesson plans at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, well, yes, I've done what you've asked me to. Did it improve anything? No, not at all. It made no difference whatsoever. In fact, the only lessons that actually went well were the ones that deviated from the plan because the students actually wanted to do more work. Relatively uncommon in the situation I was in. But anyway, that's what happened. So leaving that sort of very bureaucratic, quite rigid environment, and also very ineffective environment, and going into tuition where the parents would just have implicit faith. They didn't care about sending lesson plans or anything like that. They just said they wanted flexibility. They wanted somebody who would know what to do. If they say, this lad really needs to do geometry today, and they wanted someone to go, no problem, we'll just do it then. We'll just do geometry. And the ability to then think on your feet and do what you felt was just the best thing at that moment in time, which you were not really free to do in a school to the same extent, was really good. And the other thing was that every single lesson observation I ever had more or less went the same way. Because they always feel like teachers, they've got to give you some good news to start off with. And often in the lessons they observed, there wasn't a lot of good news at all, right? It was carnage, and all the children weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And my attempts to try and persuade, cajole, coerce them to do what they should do were mostly ineffectual. Worked sometimes, but not consistently. And so they would always come up with a lesson observation and say, your subject knowledge is very, very good. Thank you very much. Which is just basically code for I have a basic level of competence in what I profess to be able to teach. And then they would go on to describe all the terrible things about the lesson and all the wonderful imaginary ways in which it might have turned out differently. And I was like, that's great, but it doesn't ever turn out like that. What should I do differently? Along would proceed what they do in their lessons, which didn't really make any difference because they were a 45, 50-year-old head of department or a 55, 60-year-old head of department and deputy head of department are not going to be treated in the same way as a 21-year-old newly qualified teacher, right? And what they could do in their classroom that would command all the respect of their students was going to work for me. Doesn't matter like how earnestly I tried. So I then came to realize actually in the tuition environment, subject knowledge is incredibly highly valued, which played very well to me, right? I thought this was brilliant because all of a sudden people said, well, is there any chance we can switch it for today and cover some different topic? And I was like, I have no problem because I know that topic. Whereas I knew for a fact that there were some teachers in the school I had taught at, if you'd said to them with less than 48 hours notice that the topic for a lesson they've planned is going to be different, they'd fall to pieces. Because they had no clue unless they had like a bundle of notes in front of them of what, I mean, I was sat in a lesson, I was told to observe a lesson from a graduate trainee who was way better than me in the schools, in more or less everyone's eyes. But I did sit for a lesson where there was one thing that went drastically badly wrong. She did not know the difference between an atomic number and a mass number in chemistry. Now, for those of you who are not chemistry specialists, this is quite fundamentally important. It's like not knowing the difference between addition and subtraction. And so she proceeded to try and explain to a class of children how to work out or how to draw an atom, and clearly had no clue what she was doing. And the students, therefore, were also very much confused by what she was doing. And I just remember sitting there thinking, if only I could intervene, I could potentially help. But obviously there was no way of intervening without completely undermining her and saying everything you've just said is rubbish. And I didn't feel like that would be a good idea because I'm supposed to be watching her because she's showing me how to manage a class. So I just watched this catastrophe proceed in slow motion with very, very confused children and realized actually my ability to adapt very quickly to any subject knowledge request was tremendously valuable. And this opened the door for me to realize that actually that level of flexibility applies to teaching methods, not just subject content. And that's what led to me down the line nowadays thinking that tuition is the main engine of innovation when it comes to using technology or different educational practices, because you simply can't be that flexible in a school environment for practical and for bureaucratic reasons. Whereas in the tuition environment, you've got a very skilled person who is one-to-one or in a small group with students, can make those sorts of changes on the hoof, as it were, and monitor things. And if it doesn't seem to be working, they can quickly backtrack and do something different. And it's a really safe way to innovate and to come up with better ways of teaching. So I always say, I left tutoring and it taught me how to teach, which was interesting.
Thank you, John. And our last question for today, Caroline, if we can start with you, please, is for teachers currently thinking about making the move, what practical advice would you give them before they take that step?
I think my main one would be to get us, it's similar to what Tash said, to get us a hold of as much material as you can. I've got every single past paper downloaded from every single exam board going. I've got every single textbook, I don't think you can see them behind me, every single textbook known to humanity up here. I've got electronic copies of them, because the more you've got, the more you can jump to in that moment, like John's just said, the better your tuition will become, so that when someone goes, oh, I can't remember this, I tutor some science, and there are some things sometimes I think, I know the answer, I was going to clarify that I know the answer, you look it up, fine. The other thing that I would say, imposter syndrome is a real thing. And I think being kind of prepared for that self-doubt all the time, but then knowing that you are doing a really good job as well. Because it's much more difficult when you're not getting feedback from kind of colleagues, and particularly online where you can't necessarily see people's reactions. That's quite tough. So I think I would have been more prepared for it had I realised it was going to be such a big thing. So yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. Holly, can we ask you next, please? So for any teachers currently thinking about making the move, what practical advice would you give them before they take that step?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Caroline that, you do doubt yourself because you're not getting that validation from colleagues, whether that's social validation or whether that's validation about your lessons. And I think I had to really look at myself and think, why am I focusing so much on this external validation when actually I can provide that for myself? I know I'm good at what I do, but it was difficult. I agree with Caroline, it's difficult. And I think don't believe everything. If someone says to you, oh, don't worry, you'll be fine, you can earn £5,000 a month within a couple of months of starting tuition, I would just take everything with a pinch of salt, really, because you have to work hard. Expect to work hard. That would be my advice. And you have to work out what your situation is. If you're lucky enough to have a partner who's earning a substantial more amount than you, and you can actually take a back seat for a little bit, you might not have to worry so much. But if you are going to be on your own, or if you've got a family to support, or if you've got a situation where you actually really do need to earn a certain amount of money, there's not a magic bullet. There isn't a kind of do this and you're gonna step into untold riches. So I would say yes to things, even if it makes you feel a little bit scared. So for example, I'd never taught 5-year-olds before. Someone offered me some 7+ work and I thought, yeah, I can do that, it'll be fine. And actually it was fine after a while. And I think, having that challenge was also really good for me and started to kind of address some of that imposter syndrome that I definitely had when I started out. And don't be jealous of other people's success, because everyone's different. So everyone's coming to their role with a slightly different background, a slightly different perspective, different skills. And so we can all, I think, support each other with that. It should be a supportive environment for everybody. And so stick with TTA as well. That's my advice, because the support that you'll get there is going to really, really help with a lot of the issues that I've mentioned.
Thank you, Holly. I think as well, just to add, so on the kind of like, don't expect that you're going to make a large sum overnight kind of thing. I think there's a lot of guidance as well that you need to find a niche and that you need to be doing all of your own marketing and have a brand. And I think that if you're taking a very large step between between careers, maybe try and see if you can make some things a little bit easy. So maybe see if you can work with some of our corporate members who will already do all of the marketing for you. And they'll do all of the safeguarding for you and safe recruitment. They'll find the students. And it kind of just takes a lot of the onus off of you in the first instance. And it's not a bad idea to want to find your niche at some point. Totally do it, but don't say no to all opportunities that come your way, because in the first instance, it's not what you want, because otherwise you might not get all of the work that you necessarily need if you have a certain threshold that you need to make each month. And again, in terms of making your brand, it takes time, especially if you're making a big jump from a school to a tutoring. So maybe do some work through some agencies, get some testimonials from those students first. And then when you've got a little bit of information and you've got your foot in the door and you're kind of just moving, then you can say, right, oh, I put an advert in the local shop, and now I've got a couple of local clients too, who are not through agencies. I think it just doesn't have to be like an either or and all at once, or find your niche and just see what works for you. Again, like Holly said, try some placements that you might have said no to, and you still might after that say, you know what, actually I really didn't like that still, but at least you tried it. John, so for teachers currently thinking about making a move, what advice would you give them?
I mean, a lot of the things you've just mentioned, or the little things that have just been mentioned by various different people, are really, really relevant. I mean, your point there, Sam, on working with agencies. So I never placed a Facebook ad in my life. I'm very quick to tell people, if you want advice on how to get students quickly, sign up for an agency. It's so easy. They'll just do it for you. They'll find you. And yes, okay, they might pay a little bit less money, but also that's money, you never had it in the first place. So you say, well, if I get a student myself, then I'll get £50 an hour. But if I go through an agency, they'll pay me 40. And I say, okay, but is the extra £10 an hour worth the amount of time you're going to spend over the next 3 months trying to get that right and worrying about whether you'll get enough income coming in? I earned more money in my, well, it technically was my second month of tuition, because I started the first month of tuition like on the 7th of the month or something, and obviously didn't have a client until the 14th. But in my second full month of tuition, or the first full month, the second month after I started, I earned more money than I'd been on it as a teacher, because I simply took the jobs that were relevant to me that the agency could offer, and I teach science and maths and history, so there was a fair spread. I mean, there's a fair number of students who need help with science, right? And at that time I was teaching it in London, and I was doing it in person, going around. Nowadays you obviously do it online as well. In those days it was much less common. It's about 13 years ago, 14 years ago. And so I, number one, worked with agencies from the very beginning, and I just thought this is way more convenient. And I signed up for 3 or 4, and obviously then some of them turned out to be more useful than others. Some of them turned out to be more efficient than others. I was like, right, great. Well, the ones that give me the most relevant work, I'll work with the most. Seems fair enough to me. And if they're slow or they can't get their act together, then fair enough, I'll just not bother working with them. The second thing is being responsive. A lot of people have already alluded to the idea of, if you get different opportunities, give them proper consideration. Not everything will be a good fit for you, but equally, just because it's not a good fit for what you envisage doing doesn't mean it won't be a good fit for you in future. So if you get opportunities that are a little bit off the beaten track or not what you anticipated, don't just dismiss them out of hand. You might find that actually it turns out to be a really, really good opportunity. And I've had in my life to pivot, and I don't really like the term necessarily, but you have to change what I'm doing in response to the market conditions several times. That's really important. As a tutor, you're there to respond to the market need for education. And the tuition sector is incredibly responsive. If there was all of a sudden a whole swathe of people that needed teaching for a specific subject area, the tuition sector can handle it. And don't try and think too narrowly in that I've always been a maths teacher. All I'm ever going to do is teach GCSE maths. What about IGCSE? Probably it's nearly the same, exactly. So you'd easily be able to adapt to that. Is there a need to adapt to teach could you teach other areas of maths? Obviously, you might need to go and get specific expertise. You might need to do CPD, but don't dismiss new opportunities out of hand either.
Thank you, John. And Tash, for teachers currently thinking about making the move, what advice would you give them, please?
Thanks, Sam. I really like that there's a sort of consensus of thought here between Caroline, Holly, John and myself. So I've got a few points to make. I think, along the practicalities, one of the first things kind of rudimentary is obviously the money matters. And so I think it's really worth sitting down and looking at the money deeply, like how much do you actually need, and need versus want, because there may be a step change even periodically or even throughout the year seasonally. And so I really think that's worth digging into. When I left school, my tutoring still provided me with the same amount of money that I left school with. So I was kind of happy with that. But what it gave me that was kind of the intangible is the ability to travel. And so, like I said, I was more happy in and of myself because I was having the lifestyle that I wanted. And I think that comes down to as well, how do you define success for yourself? Like, how are you going to be a successful tutor in what you do? Is it because you've got a big marketing campaign and you get paid lots of money and you are recognized or whatever? And I think that's different as well. It's that external validation. You need to take all of that and really be introspective about it and take it on board for yourself. What does it mean for you to be good at your job? And so on that, obviously I left school and I thought, that's it. I've done teaching for such a long time. Like I said, I did it from work experience at 16. I thought, I'm going to look and see what other jobs I can do. What are the transferable skills? And I looked at the job market and I was really stumped. I was like, I'm going to take a significant pay cut to go into sort of the social care type industry. And those are not well-paid jobs. And so the step from teaching to tutoring, it's massively, massively transferable skills that I don't think get recognised in a commercial sense with real money numbers for what those skills are. And so I think tutoring offers the opportunity to use the craft that teachers coming out of a classroom have got literally epic skills in. Like John says, being able to pivot on a nail, you can take that and do that in tutoring and it will be so impactful. So using the craft, using the pedagogy, you've got it all and you literally do it like it's unconscious now. That's what teachers do and do really, really well. So I think that step is a very easy step to make and yet still be rewarding, personally rewarding. I think other things to think about, my last one about the practicalities is, if you start working for yourself, maybe along the way, if you're not with an agency, it's about working out what your offer is, what your package is. What I mean by that is at schools, the job of a teacher is kind of all encompassing. So yes, you teach face-to-face and you do the lesson prep, but you also do setting of homework, you also mark the homework, you also give feedback, you also write reports for parents. It's a package, right? And so when you do tutoring, as I said before, it's a much more intimate setting, especially if it's one-on-one. And so how are you going to offer your tutoring package? How are you going to get paid for those periphery tasks, for the lesson planning, for the setting of homework, for marking the homework, for the feedback with parents? Is that going to be part of your package and that you just have one fee of that? Because some parents, they want their pound of flesh. And so I have had situations where parents have stopped me for an hour from walking out the door when I'm trying to get to my next student. So can we just have a catch up? And I was like, sure. You say sure, but then you don't know it's going to be an hour. So I think, like I said, when you take in part of the admin tasks that I mentioned earlier, is thinking about, do you offer parents a once a term 30-minute call to catch up? What I find is really useful for me, it's just, again, part of my package is that after every session, I'll send a quick parents, so we've got a parents group, and I'll tell them what we did, how it went, what to work on. And for me, it's a bit of a record. It keeps me accountable. It includes them. They're now stakeholders in it as well, so that they're part of the process. There's no like hidden messages. There's no, but you said and I said. And the reason is, if something changes, this is what we said we were going to do, but we did this and that instead. You become accountable. The parents can see that silver thread of why you changed, why you did this, to spin on a quick sudden turn. So I just think those are the things to think about, how you include your package and what you are offering to the parents as well. Boundaries, actually.
Thank you, Tash. Yeah, and expectations as well. I think in terms of, I think it's a whole different session as well, like just managing expectations and parents. And I was just double checking to see whether or not, so we have a CPD live coming up it's semi-relevant on the 1st of April with Mandeep, which is on leveraging reviews and testimonials. But I know that we've also covered like dealing with parents and high pressures in some of our other kind of like webinar sessions as well, which you'll find on our YouTube channel for anybody who's watching the recording or anybody who wants to go and look after this as well. Perfect. Thank you so much to our panel. So thank you to Holly, to Tash, to Caroline, and to John. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? If you raise your hand and then you can ask it. Alison.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Brilliant. My question was if anyone had any tips on kind of streamlining all the additional kind of business related admin.
Would anybody like to start with that one?
I'm happy to start with that one.
Okay.
So in terms of business related admin, there's loads of technology tools now that have been developed for and primarily for the tuition sector, right? And it will very much, I'm not here to sell one or the other to you. You can go and look them all up. But the point is, there is a really good market now for tuition tech that will help to take off lots of the admin load for you. And also, if any of the tech doesn't work off the shelf for your particular use case, because which one's going to work better for you is going to depend to a great extent on what do you want it to do? What does your normal workflow look like? How do you want that to be optimized? Which bits do you want to have more manual oversight of? And which bits do you want to make sure automated? So we've got things like the partner showcase at TTA, which allow you to sort of hear from all the providers directly and see which ones are likely to be the best fit. And Sam, remind me when the partner showcase is. They're next week, aren't they?
It's this week now.
This week. Goodness, it's come up to me.
One on Friday.
Thursday and Friday this week. So check the upcoming events if you're interested in that. But there is loads of tuition tech now. Now it's a bit more open and transparent as to who's doing what within the tuition sector. There are people that are going, you know what, I want to develop this tool, and they develop this tool and then offer it obviously for a fee, but for other people. And it can save an enormous amount of money to be able to automate the really menial aspects of doing your job. But it will depend on your specific use case. For some people, for example, TutorBird really fits what they want to do. So other people, TutorCruncher has got a better combination of features. So for other people, they use something different or whatever else it might be. And there will be products out there which will fit what you want to do. And if there's not, there are virtual assistants out there that specialize in working with education sector and tuition sector clients who will be able to help build you a slightly more custom solution using digital tools, using things like integrations with make.com, which will allow you to integrate different processes together. So there's an enormous variety of tech out there, and mostly it's tech that's I'm thinking you're referring to, or services. The VAs provide obviously ongoing services, although the people's time is more expensive than technology. That will allow you to automate and to streamline what it is you're doing as a tuition business. And actually, it's really good to see that market is there and that there are more and more products there to do different things, whether it's onboarding tutors, managing tutors, scheduling, whatever it is you want them to do.
Tash, Holly, or Caroline, do you have anything to add to that one?
As I said, this is a work in progress for me, but I do think TutorBird, I'm a one-to-one. I'm not a business with models and agencies and anything else. So I think TutorBird is possibly one product worth looking into.
I think as well, Alison, I can see that you're not a member at the moment, but if you do want to become a member, what you then get access to as one of the benefits is to our TTA WhatsApp community. So within that, as you're trying to solve your problems, so for example, on Monday, you say, right, today I'm going to solve how I'm giving clients feedback, right? You say, hey guys, how are you all giving feedback? You know, how often are you giving it? What does that look like? You'll get loads of people messaging you saying, you know, this is what I do. I use this platform. I just use a Google form, for example. You can get those answers relatively quickly in like quite a discussion format, maybe some recommendations to go and look at. And then on Wednesday, you know, if you're working through everything, you can say, right, okay, now invoicing, how am I going to solve invoicing? So it's kind of like I guess a little bit like a staff room, right? We'll be there within the community to help you answer these challenges, whether or not it's because so we have different groups. So we have a group that's just for professional tutors. We've got one that is for, oh, my mind's gone completely blank. I think we have an SEND group, or is it just the AP group? But essentially, like if you're having questions about like a particular student, you can ask them in there. So there's just a wealth of knowledge there that you can rely on, and you'll always get a variety of really good recommendations from that as well.
Yeah, and I
really
just wanted
helpful.
to say,
Thanks.
yeah, I just wanted to say as well that I've kept my tuition business small because I don't ever want the stress of that I had it when I was on SMT. And so, you know, you don't have to expand a lot. You can just stick where you're happy. I'm terrible with technology, so this is my limit with technology. So I've never wanted to kind of go down that route. And I think, you know, quite a few people have mentioned today about just knowing what your limits are and your boundaries, and I think it's absolutely fine to just say, this is what I want to do, and you know, I'm not going to go any further with it. So I would just say that that can also be the case. You can still be really happy, really successful, and just keep it small.
Does anybody have any other questions? Perfect. Right, if there's no more questions for today, we will wrap up there then. Thank you everybody for coming, and a really big thank you to our panel members as well. I really hope that you all found it very useful. We have 2 other lessons from TTA members webinars which are already on our YouTube channel. So that was Tutor to Tuition Business, and then also a session on just becoming a tutor from a non-teacher background. It's well worth a listen to regardless, because there's a lot of viewpoints in there which will be good to consider as well. And then next Friday, which might be of interest, we have a session on working with our TTA corporate members. So this will be kind of like things to consider when working with an agency. We also have a tutor joining us as well, who will be able to cover the perspective of what it's like to work with an agency from a tutor's perspective as well. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and have an amazing day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.